Hello, everybody. Joey Sparks here. God's mercies are new again this morning.
Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus. I woke up this morning with my mind.
Revelation contains a heavy emphasis on the number 7, and you have 7 blessed statements of blessing that God gives, that Jesus gives to those who are faithful and who keep his word in all things. The 5th of those 7 blessed statements is in verse 6. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. A lot to unpack in this one. We'll just do our best to summarize it, but what a promise it is to those who die largely because of their faith, not giving in to the beast. And of course, that's important here because this is not only the beast, but the dragon is now in view. This is the destruction of Satan, and you've got the introduction of this term, 1,000 years. And the overall promise is that those who had died for Christ, those who had not worshiped the beast, who had not given in to the ultimate work of the dragon, Satan, they reign. They come to life. You see that in verse number 4. They came to life and reigned with Christ. They survived death. They overcame death through the power of God and Christ. Just as Christ died and was resurrected, so too the faithful have promise of life after death. And so think about that for a moment before we dive into some of the other details. What a great promise this is to Christians of the first century who've perhaps lost family members to persecution. Well, here he says they've come to life. They're reigning with Christ. But then also knowing they may have to pay that same price. It's not final. Death, as scary as it may be at times, is not final for the faithful Christian. First resurrection that he talks about here, those who share in the first resurrection, for those who are alive on earth but die while faithful. So those who die prior to the return of Jesus Christ. The second death is the final and eternal death, which is reserved for the unfaithful, reserved for the enemies of God, reserved even for Satan himself. So what that also means is that we don't see listed, but we know it must be true. There is a second resurrection. There is the first resurrection for those who die before Christ, but then all will be raised when Christ comes. That's the second resurrection. It's the faithful of Christ's return. You see that outlined in more detail in 1 Corinthians 15, specifically verse 23, but also 50 through 57. So there's promise of a future resurrection. If we were to die before Christ's return, there's a first resurrection and then the final second resurrection. And for those that are alive when Christ returns, we have that promise of going to be with him for all eternity. The second death has no power over those who are resurrected from Christ or with Christ. The second death is, of course, the eternal death that follows our earthly death. And it has no power over us. Think about that. Not only does the first death not have power, but neither does the second death, the eternal death. Jesus Christ, the overcomer, helps us overcome that fate of Satan as well. We're thankful so much for a Savior who reigns completely and now reigns for eternity. We thank you for your watching today. It's our prayer that God's timeless word will be on your mind all day today.
I woke up this morning.